Welcome back, guys. Final one for tonight. If this ever doesn't get uploaded or disconnected, just realize that there's terrible weather outside right now. Thunderstorms, or I don't know, who knows? Maybe Big Brother might get involved here. I hope not. Anyway, so I had a three-part series, right? Dedicated to collective trauma. So we're not quite finished with the topic. I have a special episode dedicated to it, and maybe in the future we'll return to this topic once again. Who knows? Anything can happen on this channel. It's pretty dynamic. So, what are the Epstein Files? And we want to also understand how they're connected to collective trauma. So, those are the 2 points, the two questions I want to expand on today. Okay, so let's start with the first question. What are the Epstein files? Um, so the Epstein files are a body of documents that include things like court records, flight logs, depositions, emails, investigative paperwork, all connected to Jeffrey Epstein. And if you're not familiar with him, he was a notorious financier and child sex offender of Jewish American heritage, as well as people in his network, right? So we're focusing on what he did as well as the people around him. What did they do as well? Because all of these individuals are criminals. But he's the main guy in this show, right? He's the main character. So picture this dead criminal, right? And the people he's connected to, and the terrible things they did, at this micro level, right? And then think carefully and critically, of course, about how it all significantly altered our perception of the American government and its politicians, Hollywood and its actors and actresses, major corporations and organizations and their leaders, their higher ups, and so on and so forth at the macro level. All right, so that's the Epstein file part. Now we need to understand how the Epstein files, now that we understand what they're about, are connected to collective trauma. Okay, so the thing is, um, there are going to be multiple psychologically destabilizing themes here, and that's just terrible for our mental well-being, our mental health, right? It's being touched here, but what are they? We need to understand them. So, uh, the Epstein files, they reflect institutional betrayal. They reflect abuse by powerful elites. They reflect a loss of trust in the justice systems. They reflect mass exposure and disturbing details, right? Because a lot of those files were just connected to human trafficking, rape, sexual abuse involving women, minors, foreigners, and I'm sure other disturbing things as well. And of course, it was a reflection of, and these files were a reflection of persistent uncertainty and conspiracy narratives, right? Think conspiracy theories. All right. So, I've already mentioned before that collective trauma happens when a society or large group experiences an event that damages its shared sense of, safety, fairness, even reality. And we already talked or touched on these examples, right? So they may include things like wars, terrorist attacks, pandemics, large scale abuse scandals, and so on and so forth. Now, with the Epstein case, what really makes this trauma dynamic unique, uh, it comes less from, I should say, one particular event, and it has more to do with this ongoing revelation process. Because this thing is far from over. Like every I don't know, every day, every week, every month, whatever it is, we're receiving updates about these files. So we haven't really had access or exposure to every single file that's connected to him yet. This is an ongoing process. So that's why it's really complicated. We're not finished with it. So, okay, why does this particular case, right, out of the millions that are out there, affect, people collectively? In other words, what explains why these files, these Epstein files, lead to collective trauma for our society and maybe the world? Well, it challenges assumptions about power and protection. Why is that? Because many people expect that wealth, political systems, law enforcement, social institutions, they're supposed to and they will protect vulnerable people and, of course, hopefully punish serious crimes. But that's not always the case. And, the Epstein case created a widespread perception or understanding that powerful individuals could avoid accountability for years. Basically, they can get away with a lot of things that ordinary people can't. And that can produce, this kind of reaction from society like cynicism, right? So you think everything's negative, everything's just terrible. Moral injury. You believe like morality and ethics have been violated or destroyed. Distrust toward just different institutions. You no longer believe in government. You no longer trust corporations and organizations. And there's this fear that systems are rigged, right? The same as the institutions themselves are basically just corrupt. And this is especially intense, right? Because the case involved uh, basically associations with high-profile figures across the spectrum, right? By that I mean politics, business, academia, entertainment, and other areas or domains. The other thing to consider here is that the survivors of the abuse allegations, they can be re-traumatized again. So those women, those children, when they run into news coverage of the events and updates on the document releases, they end up just revisiting those themes that they experienced before, right? Like grooming, coercion, exploitation, trafficking, institutional neglect. They relive these things again. And for survivors of sexual violence, constant media exposure can reactivate memories of the events and incidences. Hypervigilance, right? Anger, feelings of helplessness, paranoia, trauma. It all comes back to life. And the public nature of the revelations means the trauma is socially amplified rather than kept private. So everything, is out there. And it's very uncomfortable, can feel embarrassing to some, can feel just really distressing, to be honest. And I don't think there needs to be shame involved, but people do, experience that regardless. And there's this strong sense of uncertainty, okay, when it comes to the collective anxiety the public experiences in relation to the situation. A major driver or force of collective distress is the sense that we still don't have the entire picture here. Okay, we still don't know everything there is about this case because, again, there are more and more files coming out. We haven't read everything yet. And we tend to think that very important people may never face the consequences. To put it another way, these individuals will never be punished. They'll just get away with it for the most part. And maybe solid evidence that can help incriminate a lot of these individuals may be hidden or kept away from the public still. and the truth is just fragmented. We don't know what extent of the truth is even revealed. It's just hard to know. And as humans, we generally tolerate, we put up with painful truths better than unresolved ambiguity, right? We want to know what happened. That's the bottom line. We don't want everything to remain a mystery. Otherwise, it drives us crazy. It makes us sick. And this this long term feeling of uncertainty and ambiguity, you know, can create or instill like chronic social tension and obsessive like public attention. We can't stop thinking about this issue. It lives rent free in our heads. It's just ingrained in our subconscious, right? We just can't shut the fuck up about it. There you go. And so, another thing to consider here is that media ecosystems just merely intensify the emotional, um, contagion, right? So think about it. Like social media platform sites, they accelerate things like outrage because the public, they don't stop talking about it, and they want politicians to do something about it. They want the government to incriminate all these criminals that are involved, with the Epstein files. Um, there's mass speculation. People are wondering, like, what really went on, what else might have happened behind the scenes. We don't know. There's a lot of fear, distrust, and conspiracy thinking going on because we feel mentally unstable. That's natural. And just the repeated exposure to just emotionally charged content like this, right? Content that's really traumatic, really sensitive, really gets under our skin, affects our psyche, can create this feedback loop, okay, where people, they feel personally endangered or threatened by just that corruption, that magnitude of corruption that we can't control. So, this isn't too different from the nonstop coverage we get on the news about disasters or violence that, affect people who were never directly involved. So anytime we hear things about war and genocide and, other traumatic issues in life, it still affects us, just like this does, and we can't stop thinking about it. And, it just becomes this symbolic sign of broader, more general social fears that we have as the public. So this Epstein case, these files, they function as a symbol for these larger anxieties about things like elite impunity. So, you know, the leaders of our society, let's put it that way, they're going to be immune from punishment and prosecution. Exploitation is part of a human society, and it feels or seems like we're not able to do much about it, unfortunately, sadly. And, corruption is rampant, and that's something that makes us feel incompetent, right? As, civilians, as the public. Oh, my dog is having dreams or nightmares. Sorry. And, inequality is something that we really end up sensing, right? We can really feel it now. We can also experience secrecy because a lot has been kept from us. And of course, it really bothers or disturbs us that child safety has been violated, right? The rights of the minor. So when a case becomes this symbolic, right, it becomes more important than the facts themselves. People end up projecting broader, more general fears and frustrations onto the situation, and this just in turn magnifies the emotional impact of the situation. Okay, so again, let's return to the definition of collective trauma one more time, so that we can really make that connection with the Epstein case. So again, in psychology, maybe sociology, and similar disciplines and fields, collective trauma is not just the fact that many people are upset at once. I know it feels that way, but the importance here is that it really just refers to this significant disruption, okay? This shock wave in a group's shared worldview or understanding or belief about something, right? So it sends shockwaves through their worldview, their social trust. And again, these common signs include things like widespread distrust, polarization, right? People are on opposite ends of anything. Fixation on accountability, like why, is our government not responsible for these crimes? Fear of hidden threats, right? Threats that we don't know about, right? We think something could be going on, something bigger and worse. The erosion or elimination of our civic confidence. So we as a society have lost our trust, our confidence uh, in government, in our institutions. And there's obviously, not surprisingly, going to be an increase in conspiracy theories, conspiracy beliefs, because everybody's trying to figure out like how to fix this situation, what's going to happen next. And not surprisingly, all this leads to social fragmentation. People are at odds, they're divided, they no longer trust each other. They feel intoxicated by the tragedy of this moment, and so they don't really even know how to respond, how to react, or how to go about the situation. So the Epstein revelations, right, and these findings, they're basically intersecting all these issues, okay, and all these elements. And there's an important distinction you want to make. Not everyone, and this is a fact, okay, this is not something to argue about. Not every person, not every individual is going to experience this case as something that's traumatic to them. Because, reactions, responses, they vary, they're different, okay, depending on your personal history. Um, Maybe you were a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, so you're gonna just be defending him, even though there's a lot of dirt on him. Or maybe some criminals, some pedophiles, some very bad people, they're not really affected by this situation because they're just as bad as that guy was and his associates. But on the other hand, people who have, undergone or went through physical or sexual abuse, or the kind of trauma that those women, children, and other individuals experience under the hands of, Epstein and his, peers, well, they're going to be really sensitive to this particular case or situation. And, media exposure really makes us think about the situation nonstop. It can really shape or affect our political worldview for the better, for the worse. And, you know, it also depends on our experiences with abuse or injustice, as I just touched on a moment ago. And for some people, the case just mainly produces anger, frustration, um, confusion, perplexity, or even fascination rather than trauma. For others, special abuse survivors or people already in distrustful of institutions, imagine you already don't trust this government. Well, it's going to affect you, in a different way. So it can reinforce a deep sense of insecurity and betrayal. Not surprising. So yeah, you could see how one particular case, right, can actually cause or lead to or produce collective trauma at a grand scale. It's just amazing, but terrifying at the same time. So, if you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me a lot. I mean it, and have a wonderful night. I'll see you in the next one.